who would come there. The altar usually was a cross against a sheet against the front wall. And the cross was set there, and they would adorn the altar with their knitted things and stuff, whatever they could, and flowers from their garden and so forth. And the priest would come and say Mass, and also, of course, take care. He spent the whole day, because he would take care of first communions or, weddings or whatever was scheduled. And so it took him all day. And an interesting thing is the way he used to hear confessions. They would, how he had the old clothesline. Here's why that clothesline. We didn't have any dryers, did you? I don't know. So they would put a canvas, hang a canvas on that line, and the priest would be on one side and they would be on the other side. So this went on, and this happened not only at the Aroses, but also at the Murriatas. There are still descendants of the Aros here and of the Murriatas. I don't know if some of you may know Nadine Grace. Does anybody know Nadine? Okay. Nadine Grace is my comadre. My wife and I, baptized their son, and so she and my wife and Nadine grew up together. So those are the remaining people who those old families. There are a bunch of Murriatas too, but they have spread out and are not. I don't think they live in Mesa anymore. No,
Some in Scottsdale. Murriatas?
The Murriatas, yes, probably. I know that I see them once in a while in gatherings, but I don't see them. Okay, so the Aros who resided at West 3rd Street were some of the people who, who had these masses. A few years later, we had, of course, obviously there was a need for a church. What else could you say? We had to get down and try to build a church. So in 1908, Sacred Heart was built. It was a red brick building, and it had, it had the wooden floor, but it was made out of 12-inch boards. So when you went up that aisle, you really cluttered. In fact, it sounded like an army coming up the aisle. Father Lucius Cedar was his name, was the first priest to come there, because we were really a mission. We didn't have a regular priest. And this Father Cedar would come from Tempe and say Mass. The Franciscan Fathers got involved, and then the church was built in 1908. And it was a mission until about 1923, when the Spanish Claretian Fathers took over, and they were from Phoenix, and they assumed the leadership of the church in about 1934, which was a little while later. The priest who would come to say Mass was a priest by the name of Vicente Mestre, and he was actually then appointed the first pastor of Sacred Heart. And by that time, the parish had grown to perhaps about 100 people, around 50 to 100. Growth rate was very slow at those times. It wasn't like when Mesa grew after the war, you know, how fast it grew. So here we have a church then, and it's not adequate by the 40s. It's not an adequate church. We had a pastor by the name of Father Leo Gaddis, and it was apparent to him and to everybody that we needed a new church. I had attended church at Sacred Heart off and on because as I came to ASTC, Arizona State Teachers College, I became acquainted with the Mendoza family through Helen. I don't know how many of you remember Helen. Helen was the oldest of the girls, and she was a teacher in the elementary schools for a time in the Mesa District. And that was in the 30s. In the 30s. Because, as I say, I first became acquainted with Mesa in about 1933, and then I attended ASTC in 1937. I first started. Now, I always used to tell my students, now don't be like Mr. Orrantia and take 10 years to graduate. I said, Mr. Orrantia was kind of dumb. He said, it took him 10 years to graduate, but actually what happened is that, of course, I had to work for a living, and I mean, my dad couldn't possibly help me. He was very, very education-oriented. He insisted his boys go to, and his girls, but the girls didn't want to go on. And so the girls want to get married just like everybody else. You get out of high school and you get married. And my brother, my oldest brother, went to northern Arizona and graduated from there in the late 20s and taught there in through the 30s until 1942. And of the 6 boys that remained, because we were actually a family of 13, but we had lost some, you know, at that time, they lost a lot of people, a lot of babies, soon after they were born or even in childbirth. 10 of us remained, 8 boys and 2 girls, and 1 was killed in an industrial accident, and a little guy died of pneumonia. And when you got pneumonia at that time, goodbye. I mean, it was just fatal almost. Well, anyway, so I was here. I would attend church there once in a while. We had, at the college, we had the Newman Center, where we would attend church. But you know, we liked to get out, and we got to know, my brother and I were had come at the same time, because I had stayed out 1 year to work, and then we came together. We met Dr. Gammy, who was a good friend of my older brother, because he had met him in northern Arizona, where Dr. Gammy had been president. Anyway, it was, there is where I met Helen. Helen would go at night for some night classes, and we were there, and we would be maybe attending a night class, so we met her, and we would complain about the fact that we weren't getting any Mexican food. If you recall, at that time, Mexican food was not in vogue. People didn't like Mexican food at that time. Some people went so far as to say it was slop. Yeah, maybe it was, but it was a good slop. So I remember going to school and hiding, because I'd have a burro. Mom would make some burro for us, put up a sack of lunch, and off we'd go. And we'd hide, you know, hide our burros in the night, because we were afraid that somebody was going to laugh at us. But, you know, our friends, the English-speaking ones, they come up and say, "Hey, I'll trade you a sandwich." Okay. So we traded them a sandwich. But there weren't any Mexican restaurants. Well, there was one here. There was El Chavo. And you remember where Zed Pierce was, right east, no, west of that, the little old hut they had there. But we couldn't afford it. There was another one in Tempe called Ramona, and it was right on Mill Avenue and probably about 5th or 6th Street. It was pretty close to the mill in the northern part of the place. And when we could afford it, we'd go there and eat a little something. But I met Helen, and so we were complaining about it. And there was this friend of ours who was our roommate, very close friend from Jerome. And my brother and I, complaining, he said, it's all right, I mean, but it's pretty monotonous eating that gringo food, So she says to us, why don't you come and have some Mexican food with us? Oh boy, she didn't say it twice. We took her up on it, and she invited us, she set a date. And we came, and I remember we sloshed. It was weird, I mean, the rain, and a lot of our streets were not paved. So you sloshed the mud, and we went there, and there, by the way, is where I met my wife, who was much later to become my wife. She was a little girl, because I'm going to make a confession here. I was 10 years older than she was. So when I was, 20? 10. So there's a little girl on the doorway, from the doorway of a bedroom. And Helen, being a teacher, was very proper, and she introduced us to her little sister, Sally. And lo and behold, many years later, when I came back to service and completed my education, she was there at the college. And then it took us a long time to get married, but we finally made it. Anyway, we were complaining about this food, and so we met the Mendozas, who were one of the leaders in the Catholic community. Mr. Mendoza, Ramon Somoza Mendoza, was a very, very religious person, and was constantly involved in all the drives and this and selections. I remember he'd go over to the house after the war. I came back in 1945, and my parents had moved here in 1942. So my address was Mesa, Arizona. And when I came back, I didn't even know where they lived. I said, you better meet me at the train because I'm going to get lost. So they had some friends, very good friends who lived neighbors, the Harmons, who said, well, we'll take you to pick him up. So they went and picked me up. It was at night. So anyway, when I got out then, I began teaching, and I began getting access in the church. However, we were with Father Gaddis in 1940, and obviously we needed another church.
Where was the Sacred Heart Church located?
Sacred Heart Church was located on 2nd Street
and North Mesa Boulevard.
and North Mesa Boulevard. That's a country club.
Yeah.
Now country club. That's where it was located. And I don't know if you can see this. The reason I can tell you some of these things is because my wife and my wife was the chairperson, I was her assistant, I was the co-chairperson, and we did a book in 1984, striving to do some history of the church. And it's got, about a lot of this